So as we conclude our podcast, what do you think is Michael's magic?
I hope it is inspiring people to have more fun, right? We talked about it a little bit earlier on the podcast. This idea that sleep has really gotten back on the rails, that most people understand the importance of sleep hygiene, and that we're really helping folks be able to get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and how important that has been with regards to foundational health. I think my magic spot is helping the world wake up that leisure is just as important. Unfortunately, when we don't engage in fun and leisure, it's a slower burn. We don't quite understand the negative impact it's having on us, but it certainly is, and it's causing a whole host of different problems, from epidemic levels of loneliness to all of these physiological consequences we're seeing with burnout.
Welcome to Magic Academy podcast. Today we have an exciting guest, Michael, and he is the author of The Fun Habits. And he's being trained as a scientist, and he has decades of careers helping people to pivot into thinking and leveraging the power of fun, especially type 2 fun. And you may wonder why a scientist turned into this idea of fun. Would that be something hidden, that's something interesting that we need to hear about? Let's welcome Michael.
Oh my goodness, thanks for having me.
A lot of people have been interviewing you, and you been writing articles across all platforms. Can you give us an introduction that nobody else has heard before?
That's a tall ask, but yeah, I think it's interesting because I do live kind of two different lives. So in my day job, I work for an amazing company called Active Wellness, and we're really looking at this idea of health span. A lot of people are talking about it. There's a really popular book right now called Outlive by Peter Attia, but it's essentially this idea of, for a long time, we've tried to live longer, right? But now we're trying to also figure out how can we enjoy those years, right? People are talking about things like blue zones and stuff like that. So that's one side of what I do. But you brought me on my side hustle. And as a researcher and behavioral scientist, I've really been interested in this idea of enjoyment over happiness. And so the backstory there is I am a charter member of the International Positive Psychology Association. And when that started about the beginning of the millennium, around 2000, we had always used psychological tools primarily for treating mental health issues like depression and anxiety. But we had all of this really interesting information that could be used for betterment. Ideas that are more common now, but back then we weren't really talking about flow, right? We weren't talking about mindfulness and meditation. We weren't talking about gratitude. And 25 years ago, it was important to get those things out there. What happened, unfortunately, is around 2015, 2016, what we learned is we had pushed people too far to be overly concerned with their happiness. Now we have a term for it because it's better understood, this idea of toxic positivity. But back then, we didn't understand that these folks that were essentially creating a trajectory that was meant to get them happier were paradoxically becoming some of the most unhappy people. And unfortunately, I was one of them. I was looking for correlations in my life and trying to architect a life that would optimize my happiness, and it worked for a couple of years. And then unfortunately, in 2016, I had kind of a series of unfortunate events. My younger brother suddenly passed away. I had been a lifelong runner and got injured and couldn't run again. And I had all these tools at my disposal. I had been a practitioner of positive psych for quite some time. I'm like, I'll will myself out of the fact that I'm unhappy right now. I'll figure it out. With enough gratitude and meditation, I'll be able to pull myself out of this trench. And again, I was one of those people that, unfortunately, because I didn't have the emotional flexibility to deal with it, because I thought I'll just use optimism and my Pollyanna glasses. Instead, I started to become really unhappy. And because I am a researcher, I wanted to figure out why. And now we understand better, right? Some of this, I think the foundational research comes out of the University of California, Berkeley. Amazing researcher by the name of Dr. Iris Mouse has done a lot of work in this area. But what we know now is that people that are overly concerned with trying to be happy all the time actually spend a lot of time in rumination about what to do rather than using that energy to actually enjoy things. And so, to answer your question discreetly, that's why this work for me has become important. The idea that when we're in the moment and understand that we have the power to have fun and enjoyable experiences whenever we want, despite our emotional disposition, because we're going through a divorce or we just lost a job, maybe being happy isn't the appropriate emotion, but still enjoying all the gifts that life has is, right? Because that's what fills us up. If we're not finding joy at all in life, we tend to fall off a cliff emotionally. And unfortunately, that becomes a downward spiral. And the tools that I've brought forth mitigate this kind of happiness trap that has developed out of good intention, right? Because gratitude is still an amazing tool when used effectively. Meditation is an amazing tool when used effectively. But because so many people have latched on to these and overprescribed them, we needed a better way. And that's what the fun habit's all about.
Wow. And thank you, Michael, for sharing with us this trajectory, the challenges, and the stories behind the advocacy for a healthier way of finding happiness and empowered by the power of fun. I'm very curious, like you shared a little bit behind the motivation of writing the book, The Fun Habit. You also talked about in your recent blog, you talked about the 75%. What's the overall message behind this empathy and this empathize on being fun, the power of fun? Is fun really like important? Because you talk about, oh, there could be like toxic positivity, and we talked about just maybe just enjoy little moments would be the good. Should we still focus our mind on the word fun? Is this even helping us?
Yeah,
Can
so
you
what you're
share?
referring
Yeah.
to is a recent post that kind of hit a chord with a lot of people. Last year, there was this, and I think there's a book about it too, this sort of challenge called 75 Hard. It was a big, big deal on TikTok or whatnot. And it was essentially a list of things that you had to do that were incredibly difficult to execute on. But the idea was to do it for 2.5 months. And if you could maintain that, then there would be positive outcomes at the end. Making sure you drank 8 glasses of water, making sure that you worked out every single day, and all of these things that weren't necessarily enjoyable, but I think done episodically, if you had the time, if you were a single person at a young age that wasn't predisposed to potentially getting injured in the gym, and you had a lot of time autonomy, like maybe a certain percentage of the population, this particular initiative would be successful. The problem is that most of us couldn't abide by something that stringent. So the success rate was dismal, right? And all the people that I interviewed ultimately were left a lot worse off, in line with the story that I just shared, right? Went in with the best of intentions and left feeling demotivated because ultimately it was just such a high bar that they weren't able to achieve it. And so I walked that back and brought forth essentially a whole corpus of research that says when we do enjoy our healthy habits, right? When, let's say, something as simple as wanting to work out, if you're going to a group exercise class and you really like all the people in there, you like the music that the instructor
Mm,
plays, it's in line with your level of mastery. So I think you talk about flow a lot on your podcast. The tenet of flow, right, is your level of skill up against what you're doing. That's the sweet spot when you really do feel connected to whatever the activity or art form you're engaging in. That's when you keep doing it. That's when you're able to win the long game. And that's where fun is super special, right? Because when we are enjoying the things we do, we tend to stick to them. And then you get that
mm,
compound effect. So instead of really blowing something out for 2 weeks and then, all right, I never want to do this again because it was horrible, versus, hey, I exercise 4 times a week now and I've been doing it for 3 years. And we just know that incremental improvement, right? Any James Clear fan will know that 1% is the sweet spot. But the problem is, it's not at the end of the week. If you've only improved 1%, you probably won't even notice it. So it's not exciting. And so that allure, that thing where we just want to celebrate these monumental figures or achievements, has been force fed to us even faster now with the advent of things like social media. So we're so hungry for it, but it's not realistic. There's a concept in behavioral science called survivorship bias, which suggests that when we see those things that are generally outliers, right, the products of luck, a lot of times of privilege, they're not really realistic for mere mortals like ourselves, right? But we think they're the norm because that's all we see. We're not seeing the other 99% of people that are still doing amazing things, but didn't necessarily become newsworthy. And so, how unfortunate, right? But what we do know is that the people that are always trying to climb that mountain generally aren't that happy, because to maintain that level of status isn't very enjoyable. In fact, one of the people that we started talking about in the pre-interview, Elon Musk, right? It's not going that great for him. It was a fun ride. We talked about him a lot, right? But Twitter's valuation, I think, is at 20% of what it was before he bought it. Tesla is now getting attacked at all angles. The Hertz just sold off, 80% of their EV vehicles, flooding the resale market. So he's tumbling down the mountain. What Unless that's the life you want to live, and I don't necessarily villainize that. I think if you want to be a martyr, if you're not necessarily worried about enjoying life and having relationships with others, and you're narcissistic and that's what you want to do, then that's all right. But that's such a slim minority of people. Most people really just want to be loved, want to feel connected to one another, and want to feel at the end of the day that they're doing a good job. And one of the best ways to do a good job is to enjoy what you're doing.
That's so beautiful, Michael. Because of such a prevalent mindset and how media is featuring those people who are living on a different, the outliers, and it feels like everybody in our mind is like, oh, we're not enough. As long as we are not there, we're not enough. And that possibly is one reason why we feel so much anxiety, especially for younger generations growing up. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many unachievable or like aspiring people who aspire us to do the impossible. Sometimes we even, like media, we even appreciate people who are doing the impossibles to a particular extreme, and that could potentially cast some shadows in our psyche as a collective human beings on the planet right now. So it's a very important message for us to share out there. I'm curious. We're talking about the power of fun, and in our previous conversation and in a lot of your writings, you talk about different types of fun. So type 1 fun, type 2 fun, and type 3 fun. And we're trying to leverage the power to the middle, which is type 2 fun. Can you share with us a background, a simple explanation? What is all these type of fun?
Sure. Just for clarity, the idea of type 1 fun, type 2 fun, and type 3 fun isn't necessarily scientific or mine. In the book, I write about hard fun, which is more of a psychological concept, but it matches well with type 2 fun, right? And I really do like the distinction between the three. So let's start with type 3 fun so we can just throw it out the window, because I think most people agree with me. No, sorry, let's back up. So type 1 fun is things that we enjoy. So quite simply, anything that you really enjoy doing fits in this category. Type 2 fun are things that we do that are really challenging in the moment. So maybe when we're doing it, we're like, oh, like running a marathon, right? You're at mile 22, like, why did I ever sign up for this? And so it's not really fun in the moment, but once you're able to achieve that thing, the dividends that it pays when you look back, especially if you did it with friends or with something that was really meaningful. Like a lot of people, will do a hard challenge dedicated to something or someone. That connection to the hard thing really brings out so much fun as you tell the tale and relish in this memory. So that's the beauty of type 2 fun. Type 3 fun is essentially anything that you do that's hard, that's never fun. So I find that a very interesting category, that it even has fun in the title, but it's essentially everything else, right? All the things that we do that are so horrible we would never want to do them again. But the beauty is in type 2 fun, and in psychology, the academic term we give it is hard fun. is that's really where growth occurs. And another reason that these things are important is that we really don't want life to be fun all the time. Folks that really don't have a deep understanding of my work are kind of dismissive because they think I'm just talking about whimsy, and that's not it at all. What I'm talking about is that we do want to enjoy the things that we do, and sometimes that hard stuff isn't enjoyable in the moment, but again, it's something that lights us up because we have done the hard thing. And so if you're always looking for easy, simple pleasures, ultimately you'll be trying to find these dopamine highs, and you can get in kind of a vicious cycle because you're not pushing yourself, right? There's not these moments where you're creating emotional flexibility. You're always looking for that cheap thrill. At its worst, that's things like addiction, right? Or folks that are always escaping anything that's hard by running around, whatever their form of escapism is, right? We have this term that you're generally running towards something or away from something, right? And so the goal here is to run towards something that either leads to your own betterment or makes you feel like you're connecting to something bigger than yourself. But you also want to be able to enjoy that. And that's probably a little bit longer of an answer than you wanted, but those are the tenets of those three types and why they're important.
Then I'm curious, you have been helping organizations in the past decade to help integrate the message of fun, helping them to pivot their mindset and reach an outcome that they would otherwise have not even thought about. Can you share with us some case studies or interesting stories, impactful stories that you have helped organizations to pivot and be successful?
Yeah, I think there's a few different areas where my work's making an impact. One is this idea of inclusivity when it comes to fun. I think in prior decades, what was considered fun was that after work happy hour, right? What we call forced fun sometimes in the literature, this idea of I have an idea of what's fun. I'm going to force all of you guys to do it. One of my colleagues in the space jokingly talked about how escape rooms for a couple of years became popular. And I think they still have their place. I think escape rooms are extremely fun. But the idea of a dysfunctional group within an organization being all stuck in a room together that they don't really like each other, and that's the idea of creating a fun environment. And so how do you start from a level of empathy and co-create these experiences so that people all feel like they have a buy-in and that you're playing to the preferences of the group, right? Because oftentimes if a majority has a predisposition to extroversion, but the other folks don't want to do something crazy, you can actually create what we term moral injury. These folks don't want to be there. They're not having fun. And on the contrary, now they feel completely disconnected to the group, right? But with a little bit of forethought, you're able to ask everyone, what do you think you want to do? And generally, when you do that and groups feel like they can co-create those experiences, you can find out what they want to do. And ultimately, that will be fun for them because they all had buy-in and they didn't feel like it was prescribed. And so the important piece there and what I really advocate for is going beyond that and finding fun in the elements where the employee truly has agency and autonomy. And funny enough, where that starts is just allowing employees to take their lunch break so they can use that 1 hour to enjoy whatever they want to do. Again, if they're introverted, maybe that's enjoying a book that they want to read. If they're extroverted, it's connecting with either a colleague or better yet, a friend that's a couple of blocks down the street where it makes sense for them to go have lunch. And study after study shows that when you're able to have this respite, you show up the second half of the day with much more vigor and vitality to do the harder things. And so if there's anyone else out there that's as geeky as me about all the science, the primary principle here is the hedonic flexibility principle. It's been studied in a myriad of different ways, but the big study, if you Google that term, will come up. It's from Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. And what it looked at was folks that did have these transition rituals in work, right? That either were taking their break when they were off of work at 7 p.m., they put work aside and actually enjoyed the limited amount of leisure they had. And those folks that were able to do that, even if it meant scheduling fun into their calendar, were paradoxically some of the most productive people. But not only this, and I think this is what will interest you the most, they were also the ones that were the most creative. Because when you have recharged your batteries, right? When what I colorfully call your fun cup being full, then you're able to unlock nonlinear thinking. When we're tired, we have to rely on our heuristics and our algorithmic thinking. We're just like, okay, I know how to do this. I'll get it done. I'll power through, right? And then finally, I'll be able to get some rest. But that keeps you in that downward spiral because then you show up that evening so tired that you're not going to do anything that's enjoyable, right? You're just going to plop down on the couch, maybe mindlessly surf Netflix, and then start all over again. The folks that are like, I crushed today, now I'm going to go off and play pickleball with my best friend. So they're actually engaging in pro social behavior as well. Then they show up the next day happy and they're able to do that again. And the folks that work with me in this way are able to create environments where people begin to thrive, right? Instead of just feeling depleted. And in North America, especially, this is so important because a lot of my academic work was with physicians, and physicians are so burnt out that we're seeing them leave the vocation. Last year was the worst year for them ever. This rise was initially blamed on the pandemic, but you can't blame the pandemic anymore. 63% of physicians are saying that they are overwhelmed by the profession. Again, that there's this level of burnout that a lot of them don't even want to do it anymore. And that's going to create a real problem. And that's only one example of what we're seeing across the board, right? And in that context, this becomes extremely important. And there's that component. And then adjacent to it is just access to leisure. And so another thing that trying to help advocate, and we're making inroads here, is making sure that people aren't just taking one vacation a year, right? The US is second to last with regards to giving access to PTO. I think on average, it's 10 days a year for 1 year's worth of work. There's only one country worse than us in the developed world, Micronesia, at 9 days off. But the sad part isn't just that stat, right? Because it's harder, these institutional sort of social norms are harder to unroot. What's really sad is despite that limited access to leisure, only 50% of us are even taking our vacation. And what we know is that the people that don't do that ultimately start to hate what they do, right? Because they're not finding joy anywhere. And so, in that context, that's why this stuff becomes extremely important so that you do enjoy what you're doing, right? So that you can play this long game, so that ultimately, whatever lights you up, you have the wherewithal to keep doing it instead of just at some point breaking down and not being able to do anything. You're now in a state of crisis where you can't think about being productive, contributing in any way. You really just need to take care of yourself. And once you get to that level of burnout, I mean, fun's not going to save you at that point, right? Now it's truly a clinical condition, and you're working with a physician rather than digging yourself out of a hole.
Yeah. And then we ask the question, is it everything all worth it? And that gives me like this kind of a sprint. And then you push it hard and you stretch it. And then if you stretch it too hard, you can't come back.
That's the problem, right? Because sprints are really helpful. I mean, a sprint is a great analogy for hard fun, right? If you understand the rules and there is a goal, and once you get to the goal, you can celebrate that win. That's beautiful. Again, I think that's where I get my work sometimes. That folks that don't intimately understand it are like, he doesn't even want you to do that. No, absolutely not. Those are the moments, right? The problem is that we never spin down, right? Especially in knowledge work, a lot of times we don't know where the goalposts are. And it just keeps going and going. And especially because of the advent of devices, right? We don't have the chance to cognitively spin down because we get home and, oh, look at that notification. I have an email from my client. So now I'm stuck in work mode till my bed hits the pillow. And what we're learning is this access to leisure is as important as sleep. So in the 90s, I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but we used to champion sleep deprivation. I only got 3 hours last night. I'm on my grind. Again, before we hit record, we were talking about Huberman. You've got all these really smart people that if you're not engaged in sleep hygiene, then you're not a hustler because we know you're going to fall down. It's a tenet of good health. And we're learning the same about enjoyment, that if you don't have a component of your life that's enjoyable, if you're not enjoying the things that you're actually doing, ultimately you're going to fall down and you're not going to have the resilience and the ability to do the things that you want to do, similar to being sleep deprived. And so if you're fun starved, we need to figure out how to fix that.
Yeah. And then do you think one of another kind of wonder in me and an audience is like childlike wonder and the curiosity? You talked about the importance of leisure, the importance of self-care, and the creating space, white space that we can rejuvenate. What role does you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in psychology, we have this idea of valence, right? And so valence is just all scientists, right? We have to give fancy words to simple ideas. And so valence is just pleasure. Are you attracted to what you're doing and do you find enjoyment in it, right? And things like being happy, joyful, engaged, excited, these are all on the positive side of valence. Being bored, frustrated, angry, these are all things on the negative side of valence, right? This idea of wonder and awe is this beautiful place that transcends valence, because when we're in those moments, it's a blank space. We forget all that social conditioning that we have in our brain, all of the sort of scripts that have made us who we are. And we're more open to how beautiful life is, because whether it's a moment in nature, whether you're engaged in a creative act and you just see it all really clear outside of self judgment, those moments open up a world of complete access to information that's just so beautiful when people are in it. It's really hard to describe. But we know folks that can access that more naturally do tend to be happier, because when you feel that connection to something bigger than yourself, there's this, and it has been studied. This isn't just conjecture, but like Lisa Feldman Barrett has done some amazing work in this area. When you feel that connection to a greater intelligence, whether you want to call that super consciousness or whatever label you want to give it, you feel smaller in a good way. And once you begin to feel smaller and are more intimately aware of your fit in the world rather than your rank amongst your peers, then your problems seem a lot smaller. And once your problems seem smaller, that's really a much safer, good mental space to be in. And so there's a whole host of benefits. One, again, just feeling connected. But then two, you can pull ideas from disparate places. And that's where some of the most interesting innovation comes. Because so often, right, we're reading the same blogs, we're connected to the same thought leaders, we're in our space, right? But the folks that really come up with these amazing ideas are the ones that are able to be like, wait a second, I remember, let's take wellness, my area of interest. Oh, that is so cool what they did at that restaurant. There was really empathy for the client, and they were being mindful about what they wanted, and they created this level of service just because they were listening to the patrons. Like, we could do that in our wellness centers, right? And so that kind of thinking. But so many of us don't, right? We're just like, what is the SOP, right? What is the standard operating procedure? And how can I reach this level of excellence like my neighbor's doing, instead of creating something beautiful within our own heads, because we're so information rich now that oftentimes it becomes overwhelming. But being able to find a reconnection to wonder really does open up a lot of doors.
That's beautiful. I was like, can you keep talking? Can you keep talking? So I think your approach, is there any practical strategy where for our listeners, if they were like, oh, I'm interested in fostering this like type 2 fun, and so people can think on a bigger, much bigger picture in a much healthier way, what's the strategy? Are there any particular strategies? Can you give a simple framework or steps or some sort of guidance for people to start at least thinking the possibilities of turning their environment into a fun, igniting space?
Specifically to type 2 fun, it's really just an invitation to get out of your comfort zone. Looking for strategies to be able to implement that more, I think you want to be premeditated about what you want to do, right? Because if it's something that you have no interest in, then it's never going to become type 2 fun. It's going to always be type 3 fun, and what a shame. So the first is, what do I want to do that's going to stretch me, lead to personal growth or connection to something bigger? And the beautiful thing is that's a big tent. Could be a spiritual practice where you're really getting into meditation, because meditating for more than 30 minutes is hard for a lot of us, right? For others, it's going to be some sort of endurance sport. So like a connection to nature, which is really another great invitation to awe and wonder. For others, if they're really into an art form, for instance, my dad's a musician, it could be that connection to their craft, right? So again, it runs the gambit, but figure out what you think is going to be enjoyable, even if it's not enjoyable in the moment, something that when you think back about it, it's really going to light you up. So that's important. Once you engage in that activity, figure out what are the things that you can celebrate along the way. Because what we know is that the folks that tend to fail at the long game are the ones that wait to celebrate that win at the very end, right? So figure out the milestones that where you can be like, whoa, okay, I'm 20% there. This is amazing, right? I know I'm going to get there, and I know the road ahead is hard, but wow, I've already taken the first steps. Like the folks that are able to do this, and if again, I keep like having these little asides for people that want to go into the research. BJ Fogg has done some amazing work about the concept of celebrating more and more frequently, sometimes referred to as micro joys. Doing that along the way of any type 2 fun is super important. Then remember to savor it, right? I mean, if journaling's your thing, it's not for everyone, but if you do like to journal, making sure that you journal the process so that you richly encode all the information that came about, right? Because if you're engaging in type 2 fun, it generally is strenuous. Oftentimes we can get overwhelmed, but unpacking it through savoring the process and again, enjoying the fact that you did this hard thing becomes extremely important. And then if there are moments that are really, really challenging, I have a concept called activity bundling, where is there a way to pair something to the hard task so that you want to do it more, right? And so this work has some interesting work in this area has come from Katie Milkman, who's an amazing behavioral scientist. And so what she did was found people that really like podcasts, but essentially gave them the directive that they couldn't listen to the podcast unless they went and did a hard workout. And so, one, folks did the hard workout more because even though it was just game mechanics, right? It was the only time that they could access this thing they really enjoyed. But then also, it made the workout more enjoyable because here they are doing something that they want to do, listening to the podcast, but they're also now doing something that they didn't necessarily find fun, but was leading to betterment. And that type of strategy can be overlaid on anything that you want to do, whether it's comedy, music. Again, the people that you're doing it with, we already talked about group exercise. For some, it's the environment, right? Again, nature is an amazing way to an invitation into some of this. So access to that as well. But so those are the three strategies that I would give you to make sure that hard fun is as successful as possible.
That's beautiful. And I would like to add another one.
Yeah.
Animals. Dogs and cats, birds, squirrels, chipmunks, and
Yeah, I mean, especially those invitations to wander, just watching animals and watching them at play, and the fact that they're not married to meritocracy, right? Like an underlying theme to what you and I have discussed the last 30 minutes is a lot of these problems are rooted in meritocracy. And I don't want to villainize it one way or the other. Meritocracy has its place. It keeps us moving and it keeps us motivated. But what's interesting about animals is they don't care about a promotion or a trophy, or and I guess some animals do care about order, right? There is definitely alphas and betas, but for the most part, they're not trying to win anything. And when you just watch them enjoying the world, it can be inspiring.
yeah. I remember one time we were at the Niagara Fall Park, and there's this squirrel. He would bring his nuts and he would go and sit next to the fall and then just like, chewing on his nuts and then just like seeing the fall, and then as if nobody, there's like a lot of people coming by, and he was just like sitting there and just like chilling. And we were like, So that's beautiful. Let's talk about the future. If we manage to keep this meritocracy in a very healthy balance and the technology continues to develop at the current speed or even faster speed, AI, virtual reality, and neural links or brain machine interactions, how do you see the role of type 2 fun or hard fun play? What would the world look like?
Yeah, that's a really good
Ideally.
question. I think even though it's a really old book, there's a cautionary tale in Brave New World. Have you read that?
Not yet. I should. It's my
Yeah,
next
that's all
reading.
right. But so in that book, a cautionary tale in the sense that they have developed this drug called Soma that essentially allows you to displace discomfort, right? It's just like the drugs that we have today, only it's more accessible and it doesn't have the consequences of street drugs, right? And so
Mm.
you have all these rich elite essentially always taking Soma because it allows them to numb themselves. And so to answer your question, one of the consequences of all of these devices is it allows you to displace negative valence. And we trick ourselves into thinking that is fun when it really isn't. We know that from, and not just because it's inherent, but from empirical research. And that's why you're seeing loneliness and depression so prevalent in kids today, right? Because you're not connecting with others. You're getting a little bit of dopamine, but you're getting no oxytocin. And again, all you're doing is relieving pain, right? You're relieving that boredom, anxiety, loneliness, but it's not fun. It's not connecting you to anything. And so to answer your question, where hard fun certainly has its place in the direction that we're going, is being able to continually flex our emotional flexibility to create moments where we're pushing ourselves and finding that connection so that things aren't always just so easily accessible for us to displace boredom, so that we're creating opportunities to grow, to figure out what we're connected to instead of that being force fed down our throats through algorithms that really quickly figure out what will keep us intoxicated with regards to just mild intellectual stimuli. Under that lens, it's extremely important because it's going to be the way that we do stay connected, right? And are able to mitigate some of the big consequences of the overuse of technology.
Mm, that's beautiful. And I think as we move into the next chapter about the magic piece, let's give our audience a brief recap of what we've been talked about. So we talked about the story of Mike and how he integrated his rich scientific training into develop the book called Fun Habits and helping people to really start thinking about what are some healthier ways of having fun. We talked about the hard fun or the type 2 fun and how that's the fun where it keeps us in the flow. And we also talk about the pros and cons of meritocracy in this world and how there needs to be a balance. And we also talk about the role of inclusion and diversity, how we can make fun by just a deep listening of what people really want. And escape room may or may not be the answer of collective fun in a workspace. And we also flexed our imagination muscle a little bit, looking to the future of what kind of how can we continue to have fun or a more emotional experiences despite all the advances of technologies and just in general have that happy balance, a powerful balance among everything else. Beautifully said, Mike. Moving to your magic space. So,
All
what
right.
did you enjoy? What did you enjoy doing when you were around 11 years old and time just disappeared?
Yeah, for me, it was always creativity, right? So in positive psychology, a professor by the name of Marty Seligman has done a lot of work with regards to signature strengths. And my strength is always curiosity and creativity. So I think that's something I've been interested in. And I've always had this entrepreneurial bug. I remember like a story from when I was 11. I went and I didn't really know what I was doing. And I got a business permit because I thought that's what all entrepreneurs needed and started selling a magazine I made about skateboarding. And yeah, that was like my first professional outlet, knowing that I wanted to do a creative endeavor. And the funny kind of Punchline to that story is I didn't realize that you needed to renew it each year. And so the following year, my parents got like this letter from the city government that I was incurring a fine because I hadn't followed the procedure because I had no idea what I was doing. But yeah, it's rooted early on. I knew that I wanted to make my dent in the universe, as they say. That started in an early age.
You would wish I should partner up with a compliance strategist back then.
Yeah, there's no internet, right? So we had to learn from books, and if you didn't read the pamphlet, it was a problem.
Good first experience. And sometimes I wish like the government, even though if they wanted to punish people, just educate them first. Tell them.
Now there's amazing programs for kids that want to be entrepreneurs. I'm actually exploring something for my son, but for anyone else that has kids, there's this whole lemonade stand initiative and just some really, really cool programs out there that have, some safety rails so that the kids won't make the same mistakes I did.
That's beautiful. Entrepreneurship from the young age. That's wonderful. Yeah, thank you for sharing the story of a very entrepreneurial Mike at his early age. Then the question is, everybody goes through a lot of challenges. You mentioned a little bit challenges at the beginning, and that kind of paved the foundation of your book. Were there any major challenges that you have to come through or evolve from that help shape who you are or your current perspective of the world as of now?
Yeah, I would say underneath all of this work too is both my parents were workaholics, so I didn't get a deep connection with them. And that's always left a scar. I worked through it and we have a good relationship now, but they certainly didn't have a very deep connection with my brother nor myself. And when my brother passed, I could see the pain that kind of, especially with my mom, the fact that there was a lot of moments that she let go to play the meritocracy game. And so it's well understood now, this idea of time affluence, that if we don't make deliberate choices to take some time off the table for ourselves so that we create these memories with the folks that we love, the folks that don't do that are in a really bad position, especially later in life. The person most famous for bringing this to the forefront is Bronnie Ware. She has an amazing book called The Five Regrets of the Dying. And so for folks that think the hustle is the only way, they wake up in their 50s and 60s and really look back, and the third half of their life is pretty miserable. And so I think that struggle, also wanting to make sure that myself and the folks that I work with don't succumb to some of the pain that is inevitable if you don't enjoy some of the moments in your life, helps me move forward too, and makes this work very meaningful for me.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing that. So as we conclude our podcast, what do you think is Michael's magic?
I hope it is inspiring people to have more fun, right? We talked about it a little bit earlier on the podcast. This idea that sleep has really gotten back on the rails, that most people understand the importance of sleep hygiene, and that we're really helping folks be able to get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, and how important that has been with regards to foundational health. I think my magic spot is helping the world wake up that leisure is just as important. Unfortunately, when we don't engage in fun and leisure, it's a slower burn. We don't quite understand the negative impact it's having on us, but it certainly is, and it's causing a whole host of different problems, from epidemic levels of loneliness to all of these physiological consequences we're seeing with burnout. And so it's not about having fun all the time, right? But it is about figuring out how we can integrate that back into our life so that some of the time in our 168 hours becomes enjoyable, so that we reconnect with others, and so that folks do have passions outside of serving their employer, and getting that message out there and making an impact in that way, I hope, is my magic.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also, that's also a sort of leadership. And if people see you constantly having fun, like micro enjoyment, and at the same time you still get to do what you do, actually do it much better, much faster. I'm just like, oh, I wanted to know what's the secret, and I wanted to learn that. So that creates like this curiosity and potential movement along the way. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your stories and your perspectives. And thank you for raising this awareness among our audience, leaders, entrepreneurs, and managers, and leaders of family, leaders of self, to come into this awareness that having fun should not be taken lightly.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a lot of fun.